Hello, and welcome back to the Sleepy Geographer. Tonight, we're taking a gentle journey beneath the surface of the Pacific, descending slowly toward a place so deep that almost nothing from the surface world ever reaches it. We'll pass through the last traces of sunlight into the quiet darkness below, and eventually reach the deepest point of the Mariana Trench, nearly 11 kilometers beneath the waves, where an entire hidden world exists in the darkness. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I always enjoy seeing people from all around the world joining these peaceful journeys. Now, get comfortable, settle in, and let's begin. Picture the Pacific Ocean from somewhere high above it, so high that the curve of the Earth itself becomes visible along the horizon. From this height, the ocean looks like exactly what most people imagine when they picture the sea. Blue, vast, unbroken, except for the scattered green specks of islands here and there, and the pale wakes of ships too small to make out individually from this distance. Nothing about the surface hints at what lies beneath it. Nothing about the calm, sunlit water gives away the fact that somewhere down there, hidden entirely from view, the ocean floor drops away into a canyon so deep it holds a kind of darkness this planet rarely produces anywhere else. The Mariana Trench sits in the western Pacific, east of the Mariana Islands, in a stretch of ocean far from any major coastline, far from the routes most ships would ever have reason to travel. If you were sailing directly above it, you would notice nothing unusual at all. The water would look the same as the water for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. There would be no visible sign, no shift in color, no change in the surface currents to suggest that beneath your hull, several kilometers straight down, the seafloor was curving downward into the deepest depression anywhere on the surface of this world. This is one of the strange truths about the trench before we even begin our descent into it. It is entirely invisible from above. Unlike a mountain, which announces itself from a great distance, rising visibly against the sky long before you ever reach its base, the trench reveals nothing of its presence to anyone floating on the water above it. It simply waits there, silent and unseen, exactly as it has waited for longer than anything alive today could properly measure. Consider, for a moment, how strange this really is. Nearly every other dramatic feature on this planet's surface announces itself in some visible way. A canyon on land, however deep, still allows light to reach its floor, still permits a view from its rim down to whatever lies below. A mountain range interrupts the horizon long before you arrive at its base. But this trench, despite being deeper than any canyon and taller, in reverse than any mountain, offers no such visible clue. Its entire vast scale hides beneath an ordinary-looking surface of blue water and gentle waves, patient and silent, asking nothing of anyone sailing above it. To understand the scale of what we're about to descend into, it helps to borrow an image many people already carry somewhere in their mind. Picture Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on the surface of the Earth, its peak reaching just under 9 kilometers above sea level. Now picture that same mountain lifted entirely from its place in the Himalayas and lowered gently into the deepest part of the Mariana Trench. The peak of Everest, the very summit that climbers spend months preparing to reach, the summit high enough that the air itself grows too thin to properly breathe, would still sit beneath more than 2 kilometers of water above it. The entire mountain, every ridge, every glacier, every exposed rock face that has ever been photographed from base camp or from the air would disappear completely into the trench, swallowed by water stacked so high above it that no trace of the mountain would remain visible from the surface. This comparison is worth sitting with for a moment, because it's easy to hear the trench described simply as deep and let the word slide past without truly absorbing what it means. The deepest point of this trench sits nearly 11 kilometers below the ocean's surface. 11 kilometers is not simply a large number attached to a small, distant place. It is a distance greater than the height of the tallest mountain on Earth. It is an upside-down Everest, a mountain in reverse, reaching not upward into thin, cold air, but downward into water so heavy, so dark, so cold, that almost nothing about the world we know applies there any longer. Picture standing at Everest's base camp, looking up at that immense wall of rock and ice rising nearly 9 kilometers above you, feeling, in that moment, the genuine smallness that comes from standing beside something so much larger than yourself. Now imagine turning that entire feeling upside down, picturing not a mountain rising above you into thin air, but a canyon falling away beneath you into water so deep and so heavy that the very concept of a floor of solid ground to stand on becomes almost meaningless at such a depth. Both experiences ask the same question of anyone who encounters them. What does it mean for something on this planet to be this large, this extreme, this far beyond the ordinary scale of a single human life? The trench itself is not a single point, the way a mountain peak might be a single point. It's a long, curving scar running along the seafloor for more than 2,500 kilometers, roughly following the outline of the Mariana Islands above it, tracing a crescent shape across the western Pacific seafloor. Most of this trench sits considerably shallower than its very deepest point, a long, gradual valley rather than a single dramatic pit, its walls sloping downward across a considerable horizontal distance before finally reaching the narrow, deepest channel running along its floor. Picture this trench the way you might picture a long, curved wound cut into the surface of the Earth, its edges softened somewhat by millions of years of sediment settling into place. Its overall shape the result of forces we'll explore in much greater detail a little later in this journey. For now, it's enough to hold the basic geography in mind. A long, curving depression, stretching further than the distance between many countries, plunging at its deepest point to a depth that dwarfs the tallest mountain range on the planet's surface. If you traveled the entire length of this trench by boat, following its curve along the surface far above, the journey would take you past a considerable stretch of open Pacific, days of travel across water that looks, from the surface, entirely uniform and unremarkable, giving no hint that the seafloor beneath your hull was continuously shifting in depth, rising and falling by kilometers at a time, following a pattern shaped by forces that began working long before anything resembling a modern ocean existed in its current form. And this entire vast feature, longer than most countries are wide, deeper than any mountain is tall, remains, even now, one of the least explored, least understood places on the surface of this world. More people have walked on the surface of the moon than have ever traveled to the trench's deepest point. More detailed maps exist of the surface of Mars than exist of significant stretches of this ocean floor. The trench sits there, in the dark, entirely unconcerned with how little of it has ever been properly seen. There is something worth pausing over in this particular kind of unfamiliarity. We tend to think of our own planet as a place that has, by now, been thoroughly mapped and measured and understood, at least in its broad outlines. And in many ways, that's true. We have detailed images of nearly every stretch of dry land, every mountain range, every desert, every forest canopy. But the ocean floor, and this trench most of all, remains something closer to genuine wilderness, a stretch of our own planet that has resisted, so far, the kind of thorough mapping we take for granted almost everywhere else. This isn't because no one has tried. It's because the trench itself makes trying extraordinarily difficult, for reasons that will become clearer as we continue our descent tonight. The pressure alone, at depths like these, would crush almost anything built by human hands without very particular, very careful engineering. The darkness is absolute, beyond anything encountered anywhere on the surface world above, and the sheer scale of the ocean itself, covering more than 2/3 of this planet's surface, means that even our most persistent efforts at exploration have only ever managed to survey a small fraction of what lies beneath the waves. Picture, for a moment, the quiet strangeness of this fact. You are lying somewhere right now, on a planet you likely think of as familiar, thoroughly known, fully explored. And yet, not so very far away in the grand scheme of things, there exists a canyon deeper than any on land, longer than most rivers, older than almost anything alive, that remains, even today, mostly unseen, mostly unmapped, mostly held in a darkness no one has ever properly illuminated. There is a particular kind of comfort available in this thought, if you let yourself sit with it a while. In a world that so often feels fully charted, fully known, fully explained, this trench continues to hold something genuinely unresolved. It asks nothing of anyone. It offers no easy answers. It simply exists, patient and dark, and largely unseen, exactly as it has for longer than any measurement of time could properly capture, waiting there beneath the ordinary blue surface of an ocean that most people will only ever know from its uppermost sunlit metras. That is where we're headed tonight. Not all at once, and not without pausing along the way to notice everything the descent itself has to offer. We'll take this journey slowly, the way the ocean itself takes everything slowly, moving downward through layer after layer of increasingly strange and increasingly quiet water, until we finally reach that deepest point, resting there together for a while before beginning, gently, the long journey back toward the surface. Before we begin our actual descent, let's pause here at the surface itself, in the sunlit water above the trench, because this is where every journey into the deep ocean must begin, and it's worth spending a little time here before the light starts to fade. This uppermost layer of the ocean, extending from the surface down to around 200 meters, is sometimes called the sunlit zone, and the name fits it well. This is the only part of the ocean where sunlight penetrates with enough strength to support the kind of life most people picture when they imagine the sea. Coral reefs, when they exist, live almost entirely within this zone. Schools of fish move through water lit brightly enough to cast visible shadows on the seafloor below, in the places where the seafloor is shallow enough to reach. Sunlight here filters down in long, shifting columns, catching suspended particles and turning them briefly golden before they drift on, out of the light, into deeper water below. Picture floating just beneath the surface here, somewhere above the trench, though its presence so far below remains entirely invisible from this vantage point. The water around you is warm, or warm enough, heated by a sun that has been reaching this same patch of ocean for longer than any living thing nearby could remember. Small particles drift past in every direction, catching the light as they move, some of them alive in the loosest sense. Tiny organisms too small to properly see as individuals, but present in such staggering numbers that together they colour the water itself with a faint, greenish tint in certain places, a visible reminder of just how much life exists here in this narrow, sunlit band along the ocean's uppermost surface. The surface itself, seen from just beneath, takes on a particular quality worth noticing. A shifting, silvery ceiling above you, broken constantly by the passage of small waves overhead, sunlight breaking through in bright, moving patches that never quite settle into any fixed pattern. Looking upward from within the water is a very different experience from looking outward across it. The sun itself, when visible at all, appears softened and diffused, its sharp edges dissolved by the water surrounding it, its light scattering into countless individual rays that seem to reach downward like fingers, searching for whatever they might illuminate before losing their strength entirely. This life is called plankton, a word that doesn't refer to any single kind of creature but to an entire category of organisms, drifting rather than swimming with purpose, carried largely by whatever currents happen to move through the water around them. Some of it is plant-like, drawing energy from sunlight the way land plants do, forming the base of nearly every food chain the ocean supports. Some of it is animal-like, feeding on that plant-like plankton in turn, itself becoming food for slightly larger creatures, which become food for creatures larger still. An entire chain of consumption beginning here in this sunlit water and extending downward, eventually into depths where sunlight itself has no meaning at all. Picture this plankton not as something separate from the water, but as something woven into it, so numerous, so widespread, that entire schools of fish orient their movement around wherever this drifting life happens to be most concentrated at any given moment. Currents carry it in slow, sweeping patterns, gathering it into denser patches in some areas, thinning it out in others. An invisible geography of abundance and scarcity shifting continuously across the surface of the ocean, responding to wind and temperature and the deep, patient rhythms of the water itself. Beneath this drifting layer, larger creatures move with more evident purpose. Fish gathering in loose schools that shift and reform as they travel, following food, following current, following whatever combination of instinct and opportunity guides them through this bright upper world. Occasionally, something larger still passes through, a shape moving with unhurried confidence through water considerably smaller creatures treat with obvious caution, scattering briefly before reforming once the larger presence has moved on toward whatever destination it happens to be seeking. Above this drifting layer of life, the ocean's surface itself moves in its own familiar rhythm, small waves rising and falling under whatever wind happens to be crossing this particular stretch of the Pacific, sunlight catching each cresting wave and scattering into countless small, bright reflections before the wave itself settles back down and the light reorganizes itself into some new pattern a moment later. This is the ocean surface as most people picture it, restless, bright, endlessly in motion, giving no hint of the profound stillness waiting far below. Now, picture a single drop of water, somewhere within this sunlit zone, warmed by the sun, carrying within it perhaps a few of these tiny drifting organisms, moving gently with the current the way every drop of water in this layer moves. This is where we'll begin following our own particular thread through the rest of tonight's journey, the way we've followed a single shell or a single molecule on previous evenings together. A single drop of water, here in the light, about to begin a long, slow, gradual descent toward depths it has perhaps never traveled before, at least not within any memory a drop of water could be said to hold. For now, this drop remains near the surface, catching what light reaches it, moving with the gentle sway of the current, entirely unaware, in whatever sense a drop of water could be aware of anything, that somewhere below it, kilometers and kilometers straight down, a canyon deeper than any mountain is tall, waits in complete and permanent darkness. The transition out of this sunlit world doesn't happen suddenly. Light doesn't simply switch off at some precise, measurable depth. It fades instead, gradually, the way evening light fades on the surface world above, growing dimmer with every additional metre of water between the surface and wherever you happen to be. Colours begin disappearing first, red light absorbed by water more quickly than any other wavelength, so that even in relatively shallow water, anything red in colour begins to look muted, greyish, drained of its usual vibrancy. Orange fades next, then yellow, then green, each colour absorbed in turn as the water deepens, until only blue light remains, penetrating further than any other, giving the deeper reaches of this sunlit zone their characteristic, deepening blue tint before even that finally begins to fade as well. Picture descending slowly through this fading light, the warm, bright water of the surface giving way, gradually, to something cooler, dimmer, more blue than green, the golden shafts of direct sunlight replaced by a softer, more diffuse glow that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere in particular. The temperature here begins its own long, slow decline too, the warmth gathered at the surface unable to fully penetrate this deepening water, so that even before the light itself has fully faded, the water surrounding you has already begun to lose the comfortable warmth of the world above. This is the edge of the sunlit zone, the outermost boundary of the only part of the ocean where photosynthesis can properly occur, where plant-like plankton can gather enough light to convert into the energy that supports nearly everything living in the water above. Below this boundary, that process becomes impossible. Life continues, as we'll discover a little further into tonight's journey, but it continues by entirely different means, adapted to a world where sunlight simply doesn't reach, and where every calorie of energy must arrive by some other path than direct photosynthesis. There is a quiet, gradual honesty to this fading worth noticing before we leave it behind entirely. Nothing about this transition is abrupt. No sharp line separates light from dark, warmth from cold, abundance from scarcity. Everything shifts by degrees, so gradually that if you were descending slowly enough, you might struggle to say exactly when one zone ended and the next began. The ocean, in this sense, rarely deals in sudden boundaries. It moves the way this whole story has moved so far, patiently, gradually, one small change accumulating into the next, until eventually you notice that everything around you has become something entirely different from where you started, without ever being able to point to the single moment the change actually occurred. Our single drop of water continues its slow descent here, carried now by currents considerably calmer than the restless surface waves far above, moving through water, growing steadily dimmer, steadily cooler, steadily quieter, leaving behind the world of sunlight and drifting plankton and gently rocking waves, entering instead a realm that exists in a kind of perpetual, deepening twilight, neither fully lit nor fully dark, caught somewhere in between the bright world above and the absolute darkness still waiting. Many kilometers further down, at the very bottom of the trench, we're slowly making our way toward tonight. Our single drop of water continues downward, carried quietly through the deepening blue, while far below, the last traces of daylight slowly disappear into the water behind it. And somewhere beneath that fading blue, tiny points of light begin to appear in the darkness. By the time our drop of water has descended past 200 meters, the world it moves through has changed almost entirely from the bright, warm layer it left behind. This is the twilight zone, and the name carries real precision to it. Some light still reaches this far down, but only barely, only as a faint, blue-grey suggestion of illumination rather than anything resembling true daylight. If you held up your hand here, you might just make out its shape against the surrounding water, but you would see no colour in it at all, only shades of deep blue fading gradually into something closer to grey, then finally into a blue so dark it barely qualifies as light at all. This zone extends from roughly 200 meters down to around 1,000, and within that stretch, the last remaining traces of sunlight fade away almost completely, extinguished not suddenly but gradually, the way the last coals of a fire dim slowly rather than going out all at once. Picture descending through this zone slowly, watching the blue around you deepen with every passing matra, the water pressing in with a stillness that feels different from the restless, sunlit world above. Sound behaves differently here too, carrying further and more clearly through the denser, colder water, so that even in the visual dimness, this zone holds its own particular acoustic quality, distant clicks and calls travelling for considerable distances, though visibility itself has shrunk to almost nothing beyond whatever narrow field a creature's own eyes, or a submersible's own lights, might manage to illuminate. The water itself feels different here too, In whatever sense, water can be said to feel different, denser somehow, heavier, though its actual composition has changed very little from the layer above. What has changed is everything surrounding it, the pressure building steadily, the temperature dropping by degrees with every additional stretch of depth, the whole character of this zone shifting into something considerably more foreign than the familiar, sunlit water so many meters above. The pressure here has already grown considerably beyond anything encountered near the surface, though it will continue building far beyond even this depth as our journey continues. Water, unlike air, resists compression, and its sheer weight accumulates rapidly as you descend, each additional layer pressing down on everything below it with a force that grows steadily heavier the deeper you travel. At the boundary of this twilight zone, the pressure already exceeds anything a human body could withstand unprotected, dozens of times greater than the familiar pressure of air at the surface. A weight so consistent and so absolute that it shapes nearly every aspect of how life manages to exist at this depth. This growing pressure explains, in part, why this zone marks such a significant boundary in the character of the ocean. Above it, in the sunlit water, pressure remains gentle enough that a wide variety of life can move freely between different depths without much difficulty. Here, in the twilight zone, that pressure has become significant enough that any creature living at this depth has had to develop real, specific adaptations simply to survive the crushing weight of the water surrounding it on every side. Bodies here tend towards softer, more flexible structures than their surface-dwelling counterparts, less reliant on rigid bone or hard shell, better able to withstand the constant, immense pressure pressing in from every direction without being crushed by it. Picture a creature moving through this dim, blue-grey water, its body soft and almost gelatinous in places, adapted across countless generations to a pressure that would deform or destroy almost anything built the way surface creatures are built. This adaptation isn't dramatic or sudden. It's the same kind of slow, patient, evolutionary process we've followed in other stories on this channel. Populations shaped gradually, generation after generation, by whatever particular conditions define their own specific stretch of habitat, until what remains is a creature perfectly suited to a world that would be instantly fatal to almost anything from the brighter, gentler layer above it. Many creatures here have also lost, across generations of adaptation, structures that would have served them well nearer the surface, but offer little advantage in this deepening gloom. Eyes, in some species, have grown larger rather than smaller, adapted to gather what little light remains with as much sensitivity as possible. In others, eyes have shrunk instead, or disappeared almost entirely, replaced by an increased reliance on other senses, vibration and chemical signals carrying information that vision alone could no longer reliably provide in water this dim. Here, in this deepening dimness, something remarkable begins to appear, scattered through the water like scattered stars against a sky that has lost its sun entirely. Bioluminescence. This is light produced by living creatures themselves, generated through chemical reactions occurring within their own bodies, entirely independent of any sunlight reaching down from the surface far above. In the twilight zone, where natural light has faded to almost nothing, this self-generated glow becomes one of the primary ways many creatures navigate their surroundings, communicate with one another, attract prey, or avoid becoming prey themselves. Picture drifting through this zone and watching small points of light appear and disappear around you, some flickering briefly before fading, others holding a steady, gentle glow for several seconds before dimming away into the surrounding darkness. Some of these lights belong to small, drifting creatures barely larger than the plankton we encountered near the surface. Tiny organisms that have developed their own particular method of producing light, using it perhaps to startle a potential predator or to lure some smaller prey close enough to capture. Others belong to larger, more deliberate hunters, patient shapes moving slowly through the gloom, using bioluminescent lures or markings to draw curious creatures close enough to strike. This light serves purposes here that sunlight served in the zone above, though transformed into something considerably more intimate, more localized, more deliberately controlled by the very creatures producing it. Where sunlight illuminated the entire sunlit zone uniformly, indifferent to whatever lived within it, bioluminescence here is produced selectively, precisely, each creature choosing, in whatever sense choice applies to such simple nervous systems, exactly when and how brightly to reveal its own presence within the surrounding dark. The chemistry behind this glow varies from creature to creature, though most rely on some combination of specialized compounds reacting together within their bodies to produce light without producing significant heat, a process considerably more efficient than the kind of light production familiar from the surface world, where a burning flame or a heated filament wastes most of its energy as warmth, rather than illumination. Here, in the cold, patient dark, that efficiency matters. Energy is scarce, hard-won, carried down slowly from the productive waters far above, and nothing here can afford to waste much of it producing light that serves no useful purpose. Picture one particular creature drifting through this zone, its body outlined by a faint, pulsing glow along one edge, a pattern of light flashing in a rhythm too specific, too deliberate, to be anything but a genuine signal, meant for other creatures of its own kind moving somewhere nearby in the same deepening darkness. This is a language written entirely in light, developed across countless generations in a world where sound and touch remain useful, but where vision, robbed of natural illumination, has had to find an entirely different way to remain relevant. Some fish here carry rows of small, glowing points along their sides, arranged in patterns unique enough that researchers studying them have found these patterns function almost like a signature, allowing individuals to recognize their own species, and sometimes even specific individuals, purely by the particular arrangement of light along a passing shape in the darkness. Others produce a single, larger glow, perhaps near a specialized lure extending from their head, dangled invitingly in the dark water to attract smaller, curious creatures close enough to become a meal. This zone, despite its deepening darkness, is far from empty. It holds one of the most densely populated layers of the entire ocean, home to countless small fish and crustaceans that gather here in numbers substantial enough to form what researchers sometimes call a deep scattering layer, a stretch of water so thick with drifting, swimming life that it can actually be detected by sonar, appearing almost like a false seafloor to instruments that don't yet know to expect it. Many of these creatures rise closer to the surface each night, following the fading light upward to feed in slightly shallower water before retreating back down into the safety of deeper darkness as the sun rises again above the surface far overhead. This nightly migration represents one of the largest coordinated movements of life anywhere on the planet, an entire ecosystem shifting its depth twice a day, invisible to anyone standing on a boat far above, unaware that beneath their hull an enormous population of creatures was rising and falling in perfect, ancient rhythm with the daily cycle of light and dark. Picture this migration happening right now. Somewhere beneath the surface of the wider ocean, countless small bodies rising steadily upward through the darkening water as evening settles over the surface far above, an entire hidden population moving together, guided by whatever combination of instinct and sensitivity to fading light has shaped their behavior across generations too numerous to count. By morning, they will have retreated again, sinking back down into the safety of deeper, darker water, repeating a journey they have made every single day of their lives, and that their ancestors made every single day before them, for longer than this story could properly trace. As our drop of water continues its own slow descent through this zone, it passes through something else worth pausing to notice, a slow, continuous fall of pale, drifting particles descending from the brighter water far above. This is marine snow, and the name suits it well. It looks, in the dim light still filtering weakly through this upper stretch of the twilight zone, remarkably like snow falling through still winter air, small pale flakes drifting downward at an unhurried, steady pace, catching what little light remains before disappearing further into the depths below. This marine snow consists of organic material, the remains of dead plankton, fragments of decaying tissue, waste produced by countless creatures living in the brighter water above, all of it slowly sinking, drawn downward by gravity, falling continuously toward the deep ocean floor in a process that has been happening without pause for as long as life has existed in the sunlit water far above. Picture watching a single flake of this marine snow drift past, small and irregular, tumbling gently as it falls, moving at a pace so unhurried that it might take hours, or even days, to travel from the surface waters where it originated down through this entire twilight zone and further still into the deeper darkness below. This is one of the primary ways energy and nutrients travel from the sunlit, productive layer near the surface down into the deep, dark reaches of the ocean where sunlight itself can never reach, feeding creatures at every depth along the way, each one taking what it needs from this slow, continuous, gentle rain of organic material before the rest continues its patient fall toward the ocean floor, kilometers below. Some of this marine snow never completes its journey at all, consumed along the way by whatever creature happens to encounter it first, a small crustacean drifting through the twilight water reaching out to catch a passing flake, or a fish rising briefly from below to snatch a larger fragment before it can sink any further. What remains continues onward, joined constantly by fresh material falling from above, an endless, gentle procession that has been raining down through this water for longer than any ocean current has run its present course, longer than any species alive today has existed to intercept it. This marine snow will matter again later in tonight's journey, once we reach the trench floor itself, because it represents one of the primary sources feeding the deep sea ecosystem existing down there in water far too deep and far too dark for anything resembling ordinary photosynthesis to occur. For now, it's enough to watch it drift past, this constant, gentle snowfall moving endlessly downward through the twilight zone, indifferent to the passage of time in any sense a surface creature might recognize, simply falling, the way it has always fallen, toward a floor most of it will eventually reach only after a journey stretching across days or weeks of steady, patient descent. Our own drop of water continues downward too, past the deep scattering layer, past the drifting bioluminescent shapes, past the slow, continuous fall of marine snow, moving steadily toward the lower boundary of this twilight zone, where even the faintest trace of sunlight finally gives out entirely. Around 1,000 meters down, something shifts in a way that feels, even to a drop of water, without any capacity for genuine perception, like crossing a genuine threshold. The last measurable trace of sunlight, already reduced to almost nothing throughout the twilight zone, finally disappears completely. Below this point, no natural light from the surface reaches at all, not even the faintest blue-grey suggestion of illumination that characterized the water above. This is the beginning of what's often called the midnight zone, and unlike the gradual, patient fading that marked the transition into twilight, this boundary carries a genuine, absolute quality to it. Above, however dim, there was still light. Below, there is none. Not occasionally, not faintly, none at all, ever, except for whatever bioluminescent glow-some passing creature happens to produce. Picture crossing into this complete darkness, the water around you now entirely without any trace of natural illumination, a darkness so total that human eyes, adapted across their own long evolutionary history to a world of at least some available light, would find nothing here to focus on at all. This isn't simply a very dim room, the kind of darkness you might experience closing your eyes in a familiar space. It's an absolute absence, the same darkness whether your eyes are open or closed, the same whether you've been down here for a moment or for hours. A darkness that offers no adjustment period, no gradual acclimation, simply the permanent absence of anything for the eye to register at all. The midnight zone extends from roughly 1,000 meters all the way down to around 4,000, an enormous stretch of ocean existing in this permanent, complete darkness. Here, the pressure has grown considerably heavier still than anything encountered in the twilight zone above, building steadily with every additional metre of descent, the accumulated weight of the entire water column above pressing down with a force that would be instantly fatal to anything not specifically adapted to withstand it. And yet, despite this immense pressure, despite the absolute and permanent darkness, life continues here too, adapted across countless generations to conditions that would seem to anything accustomed to the bright, gentle world of the surface, entirely incompatible with survival of any kind. The transition into this zone brings with it a quiet the twilight zone above never quite achieves, even in its own dimness. Fewer creatures live here in comparison to the crowded layers closer to the surface, energy having grown scarcer with every additional metre of descent, filtered down now only through the slow arrival of marine snow or through whatever creatures venture downward from the more populated waters above. This is a leaner world, its inhabitants more widely spaced, more patient, more conservative in their movements, since every expenditure of energy here matters considerably more than it would in the abundant waters closer to the sun. What strikes many people most about this zone, once they truly sit with what it represents, isn't simply the darkness or the pressure, remarkable as both certainly are. It's the profound, unbroken stability of everything else. Near the surface, conditions shift constantly, temperature rising and falling with the sun, currents responding to wind and weather, light changing by the hour and by the season. Here, in the midnight zone, almost none of that applies. The temperature remains close to freezing, consistently, without meaningful variation between day and night, between one season and the next. The pressure, at any given depth, remains essentially constant, an unchanging weight that has pressed down on this exact stretch of water for longer than any measurement of time could properly express. The darkness, of course, never varies at all, absolute and permanent regardless of what hour happens to be passing on the surface far above. Picture this stability the way you might picture the deep, patient stillness of an underground cave, sealed away from the changing seasons and shifting weather of the surface world, existing instead in its own permanent, unchanging present. The midnight zone holds this same quality. A vast stretch of ocean existing in conditions so consistent, so unvarying, that entire creatures living here may go their whole lives without experiencing anything resembling the concept of change that governs so much of life closer to the surface. No day, no night, in any meaningful sense, since darkness here is simply the permanent, unchanging condition of existence itself. No summer, no winter, no storm passing overhead to disturb the deep, settled calm of this water. There is something almost restful in imagining a creature living out its entire existence this way, never once needing to adjust to a change of season, never once caught off guard by a shifting current or a sudden storm disturbing the surface far above. Life here moves according to its own internal rhythms rather than any external cue, guided by hunger and instinct rather than by the rising and setting of a sun it will never see. There is something worth sitting with quietly in this particular quality of the midnight zone, something that feels, in its own strange way, peaceful rather than frightening, despite the crushing pressure and absolute darkness that define it. This is a place entirely free from the restlessness that characterizes so much of the world above it. No waves, no shifting light, no changing temperature to force constant adaptation. Just a deep, permanent, unbroken stillness, undisturbed by anything happening on the surface far, far above, indifferent entirely to whatever storms might be raging up there, whatever seasons might be turning, whatever changes might be reshaping the sunlit world so many kilometers overhead. Picture our single drop of water having traveled now through the bright, restless surface, through the fading, bioluminescent twilight, arriving finally here in this permanent darkness, this unbroken cold, this profound and ancient stillness. It continues its slow descent through water that has remained essentially unchanged in its basic character for longer than almost anything on the surface world above could properly measure, moving now toward depths still considerably further down, toward pressures still considerably greater, toward a floor that waits, patient and dark and cold, at the very bottom of the deepest trench on the surface of this entire planet. Somewhere far below this drop of water, deeper still than even this profound darkness, the seafloor itself is bending downward, curving into the vast depression that gives this entire region its name, shaped not by anything happening within the water at all, but by forces working far beneath it, in rock rather than water, across a span of time considerably longer than even the deepest stretch of ocean. Above it has existed in its current form. Deep beneath the water our drop has been descending through, far below even the darkest reaches of the midnight zone. The true origin of this trench lies not in anything the water itself has done, but in the slow, patient movement of rock, working across a span of time considerably longer than the ocean above it has existed in its current form. To understand how a canyon this deep came to exist, we need to leave the water for a moment and turn our attention to the seafloor itself, and to the forces working beneath it, the same kind of forces that built the mountains explored on other evenings on this channel, though here producing something altogether different. Not a range rising toward the sky, but a wound cut downward into the crust of the earth itself. The surface of this planet, the solid ground beneath every ocean and every continent, is not one single continuous shell. It is broken into pieces, vast slabs of crust called tectonic plates, each one drifting slowly across the deeper, softer rock of the mantle below, moving at a pace so gradual it would take a human lifetime to notice even a modest shift in position. These plates carry entire continents on their backs in some cases, and in others form the floors of whole oceans, spreading and drifting, and occasionally colliding with one another across stretches of time too vast for any single perspective to properly hold. Here, in the Western Pacific, two of these plates meet. The Pacific Plate, one of the largest such plates on the entire planet, carries beneath it an enormous stretch of ocean floor, drifting slowly westward across millions of years, following a path shaped by currents of heat and pressure churning deep within the mantle far below. To its west, a smaller plate, the Philippine Sea Plate, holds its own position, caught between the much larger Pacific Plate on one side and the edge of the Asian continent on the other. Where these two plates meet, something happens that doesn't occur when continents collide with one another, the way we've explored in stories about mountain formation on previous evenings. Here, one plate is considerably denser than the other, carrying within its rock a composition heavier in a very literal sense than the lighter material forming the plate beside it. And when a denser plate meets a lighter one, something has to give. The denser plate does not push the lighter one upward, the way two similarly weighted continents might buckle and fold against each other to build a mountain range. Instead, the denser plate sinks. The two plates have been meeting at this boundary for an extraordinarily long stretch of time, long before anything resembling the modern trench existed in recognizable form. Rock arriving here today follows the exact same downward path carved by rock that arrived millions of years earlier, wearing that path a little deeper with every fresh arrival, the way a single, well-worn trail through a forest grows more defined with every traveler who follows it, until eventually the trail itself becomes indistinguishable from a permanent feature of the landscape. This process is called subduction, and it represents one of the most powerful, most consequential forces shaping the surface of this entire planet. The Pacific Plate approaches the boundary where it meets the Philippine Sea Plate, moving with the same imperceptible slowness that characterizes nearly every geological process we've explored across our evenings together, a pace too gradual for any single observation to detect, yet powerful enough, given sufficient time, to reshape the entire structure of the seafloor. As the denser Pacific Plate reaches this boundary, rather than colliding directly with the plate beside it, it begins instead to bend downward, angling beneath the lighter Philippine Sea Plate, sliding gradually into the deeper mantle below, the way one thing might slip quietly beneath another rather than meeting it head-on. This downward bending is precisely what carves the trench itself. As the Pacific Plate curves beneath its neighbor, the seafloor along this boundary is pulled downward with it, flexing into the same long, curving depression we described earlier in tonight's journey. The trench forming not because anything has been removed from this stretch of ocean floor, but because the floor itself has been bent, gradually and continuously, into the deep, narrow trough we've been descending through all evening. This bending unfolds in extremely slow motion, a process spanning not a single dramatic event, but millions of years of continuous, patient movement, the Pacific Plate sinking a little further with each passing century, the trench deepening by fractions of a metre with every passing age, until what began, perhaps, as only a modest depression in the seafloor gradually became the deepest point on the surface of this entire planet. Along the outer edge of this boundary, where the descending plate first begins its downward curve, the seafloor bulges very slightly upward before beginning its long fall, a subtle rise called the outer trench swell, formed by the plate flexing under the strain of its own descent, the way a diving board flexes upward at its base just before someone standing on its far end pushes downward into the water below. This small rise, only a few hundred meters in height compared to the many kilometers the trench itself will eventually drop, marks the outermost edge of the entire subduction system, the very first sign, moving inward from open ocean, that something enormous and patient is happening beneath the seafloor in this particular stretch of the Pacific. The plate does not simply disappear once it begins its descent beneath its neighbor. It continues sinking, gradually, into the hot, deep mantle far below the crust, following a path that carries it hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface, deep enough that the rock itself begins to change under the pressure and temperature it encounters at such depth, releasing fluids that help trigger melting in the mantle above, feeding the volcanic activity that appears elsewhere along this same tectonic boundary. This connects, in a way worth pausing over, to the same fire we explored in an earlier journey on this channel, when we followed water rising from deep within the Earth to help fill the very first oceans this planet ever produced. The volcanic islands scattered along portions of this same subduction zone, including the Mariana Islands themselves, whose name this entire trench carries, owe their existence to precisely this process, magma rising from the melting, descending plate, pushing upward through the crust above until it finally reaches the surface and builds new land, one eruption at a time across a timescale stretching back millions of years. There exists a strange symmetry contained within this single geological process. On one side, the descending plate carves this trench downward, deeper and deeper into the deepest depression the planet's surface has ever produced. On the other side, not so very far away in geological terms, that same descending plate feeds the volcanic fire building entirely new islands upward out of the same ocean into daylight and air. Destruction and creation, in this sense, are not separate processes here, but two expressions of precisely the same deep, patient mechanism, the same slow bending and sinking and melting of rock that has been operating along this boundary for longer than this trench itself has existed in anything resembling its current form. The islands built by this rising magma bear little visible resemblance to the trench that indirectly feeds their formation, standing above the ocean surface in daylight and open air, their volcanic slopes home to entirely different communities of life than anything found in the crushing darkness so far below. And yet the two features remain permanently linked, bound together by the same descending plate, the same slow chemistry of melting rock, the same patient subduction that has been reshaping this entire stretch of the Western Pacific for longer than any single mountain range or ocean basin elsewhere on the planet has existed in its current form. The particular depth this trench has reached owes something, too, to the specific age and character of the rock being subducted here. The oceanic crust of the Pacific Plate arriving at this boundary is among the oldest oceanic crust found anywhere on the planet, having formed at a mid-ocean ridge many millions of years ago, then drifted slowly across the entire width of the Pacific Basin before finally arriving at this particular boundary, cooling and thickening and growing steadily denser throughout that long journey. This age matters considerably to how deeply the plate is able to sink once it reaches the subduction zone. Older oceanic crust, having had more time to cool since its original formation at whatever ridge produced it, tends to be denser than younger crust, and denser material sinks more readily, more steeply, into the mantle below. This is part of why the Mariana Trench, formed by some of the oldest oceanic crust anywhere subducting beneath a considerably younger, lighter plate, has reached a depth exceeding almost every other subduction zone found anywhere else on the planet, an unusual combination of factors coming together across a length of time reaching back tens of millions of years to produce the single deepest point on the entire surface of this world. This old crust, having formed at some distant ridge far across the Pacific, drifted for millions of years across the wide, open ocean, gradually cooling, gradually thickening, gradually growing denser with every passing age, before finally arriving here at this one particular boundary, ready to begin its long, slow descent back into the depths of the earth from which, in some very distant sense, it originally emerged. There is a kind of patient, unhurried logic to this entire cycle. Rock rising at one boundary, spreading slowly across an ocean basin, and finally returning, after a journey spanning tens of millions of years, back into the depths it originally came from, carrying with it whatever sediment and material it has accumulated along its long journey across the seafloor. Every stretch of oceanic crust on this planet, in fact, follows some version of this same enormous, unhurried circuit, rising as fresh rock at a mid-ocean ridge somewhere, spreading gradually outward across the seafloor over the course of millions of years, cooling and aging the entire way, before eventually reaching some subduction boundary and sinking back into the depths from which its raw material originally came. No stretch of ocean floor anywhere on Earth is truly permanent. Every basin, every trench, every ridge exists as one stage within an endlessly turning cycle, rock recycled continuously between the surface and the deep interior across a timescale so vast that entire ocean basins can open and close completely within it, appearing and disappearing the way clouds appear and disappear against the surface sky, though measured here not in hours but in tens and hundreds of millions of years. Now, with this deep, patient mechanism in mind, we can return to the water and to our own drop, continuing its descent, moving now toward the very deepest point this entire subduction process has managed to carve into the surface of the planet, a narrow trench within the larger trench, sometimes called the Challenger Deep. This is the single lowest point on the entire surface of the Earth, deeper than any other stretch of ocean floor anywhere on the planet, deeper than any other trench, deeper than any depression found anywhere else beneath any ocean, on any continent, at any point across the entire surface of this world. The scale of water stacked above this single point runs to nearly 11 kilometers, layer after layer, from the bright, restless surface all the way down through the fading twilight and the absolute darkness of the midnight zone, accumulating into a weight so immense that it becomes genuinely difficult to translate into any comparison that properly captures its scale. At the very bottom of this trench, the pressure exceeds 1,000 times what exists at the ocean's surface, a pressure more than 1,000 times greater than the pressure at the ocean's surface, pressing down from every direction with a force almost impossible to imagine from the world above, all at once, pressing down with their combined weight concentrated onto a single point. The Challenger Deep itself is not a wide, sprawling feature, but a narrow, elongated slot, considerably tighter and more confined than the broader trench surrounding it, tapering inward like the final, deepest fold of a canyon that has spent millions of years gathering itself toward this one particular, ultimate low point. Its walls rise steeply on either side, disappearing upward into darkness that no light, natural or otherwise, has ever properly illuminated across its entire length. Very few human beings have ever traveled to this exact depth, and the ones who have made that journey did so only after generations of careful engineering, testing and preparation, developing vessels capable of withstanding a pressure that would instantly crush almost anything built according to ordinary standards. The first descent to this deepest point happened in 1960, when a vessel called the Trieste, carrying 2 people within a specially reinforced steel sphere, sank slowly down through every zone we followed tonight, through the bright surface water, through the fading twilight, through the absolute darkness of the midnight zone, continuing further still, down past depths no vessel had ever reached before, until it finally settled gently onto the floor of the Challenger Deep itself. The 2 men aboard spent only a brief span of minutes at the very bottom before beginning their long ascent back toward the surface. But in that short window, they became the first human beings to witness, directly, the deepest point on the entire surface of this planet. In the decades since that first descent, only a small handful of other expeditions have managed to repeat the journey, each one requiring its own considerable feat of engineering, purpose-built vessels designed specifically to withstand a pressure environment unlike anything encountered anywhere else humans have ever chosen to travel. Some of these more recent expeditions have carried solo explorers, spending hours rather than minutes at the bottom, using improved technology to observe and record a stretch of ocean floor that remains, even now, one of the least visited places on the entire surface of this world. One of these small, reinforced vessels, descending slowly through the same darkness our own drop of water has been traveling through all evening, carries its lights in a narrow, focused beam through water otherwise entirely without illumination, its hull built specifically to withstand a pressure that would crush an ordinary submarine as easily as a hand might crush a paper cup. The journey down takes hours, moving at a careful, deliberate pace through zone after zone, past the last traces of bioluminescent light, past the slow, continuous fall of marine snow, into a darkness and cold and pressure that few human vessels have ever been built to properly withstand. Inside such a vessel, the occupants often describe the descent itself as strangely calm, the roar and turbulence one might expect from such an extreme journey almost entirely absent, replaced instead by a profound, steady, quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of metal settling under mounting pressure, and by the soft hum of instruments recording depth and temperature as the vessel continues its slow, patient fall toward the bottom. Our own drop of water requires no such careful engineering to complete this same journey. It simply continues its slow, patient descent, following the same downward pull that has guided it since it first began its fall so many hours ago, near the beginning of tonight's journey, in the bright, sunlit water so many kilometers above. This single drop finally arrives, after its long journey through every zone we followed tonight, at the very floor of the Challenger Deep itself, settling gently onto ground that few human eyes have ever directly witnessed, resting now at the absolute lowest point on the surface of the entire planet, beneath nearly 11 kilometers of water pressing down from above in darkness so complete and so permanent that it has existed here, essentially unchanged, for millions of years. This is where our drop's long fall finally ends, or perhaps, more accurately, where it finally settles into stillness for a while, joining the vast, ancient, patient water that has already gathered here across countless centuries, resting now at the bottom of the deepest place on Earth, surrounded by a silence and darkness that few living things have ever managed to properly witness, and fewer still have ever managed to fully understand. What waits for it here on this deepest floor is not emptiness, despite everything we've described about the crushing pressure and absolute darkness defining this place. Life exists here too, adapted across countless generations to conditions that would seem, from anywhere else on the surface of this planet, entirely incompatible with survival of any kind. Small, pale creatures move slowly across the fine sediment covering this ancient floor, their bodies shaped by pressures that would instantly destroy almost anything arriving from the brighter world so many kilometers above, going about whatever quiet business defines their own particular existence, entirely unaware of the immense weight of ocean and history pressing down upon the ground beneath them, and entirely unaware, too, of the single drop of water that has just completed its own long, patient journey to rest here, alongside them, at the bottom of everything. On the floor of the Challenger Deep, in water pressed down by a weight few structures on the surface world could ever withstand, something moves. It is small, pale, almost translucent, its body catching no light at all in this permanent dark, since there is none here to catch. And yet it moves with the same basic purpose every living creature carries, searching, feeding, continuing whatever quiet cycle of existence has sustained its kind across generations stretching back further than most species found anywhere closer to the surface. This is a snailfish, though the name gives little indication of how remarkable its presence here actually is. Snailfish of this particular kind have been recorded living at depths exceeding 8,000 meters, deeper than almost any other vertebrate anywhere on the planet. Their soft, semi-transparent bodies gliding slowly across sediment that has remained essentially undisturbed for longer than any measurement of surface time could properly express. To understand how a fish, an animal built around the same basic vertebrate structure as almost every other fish in the ocean, manages to survive at a depth that would instantly kill nearly everything else with a spine, it helps to consider what pressure actually does to a living body, and what particular adaptations allow certain creatures to withstand it where others cannot. Pressure at this depth doesn't crush a body the way an object might be crushed by some external force pressing inward from one direction. Water pressure surrounds a body entirely, pushing evenly from every side at once. The real danger this pressure poses comes instead from what happens inside a body that contains air, or empty space, or gas pockets of any kind. Air compresses considerably more than water does, and any pocket of air trapped inside a creature's body at this depth would be squeezed down to almost nothing, collapsing the surrounding tissue along with it. This is why nearly every creature adapted to live at extreme depth lacks the kind of gas-filled swim bladder that helps fish nearer the surface control their buoyancy. Instead, deep-sea fish like this, snailfish, rely on other methods entirely, storing lightweight fats and oils within their tissue to help offset their weight in water, achieving a kind of neutral buoyancy without ever needing to hold any compressible gas inside their bodies at all. The snailfish's own body reflects this adaptation directly. Its flesh is soft, almost gelatinous, lacking the firm, muscular density that characterizes fish built for speed and power nearer the surface. Its bones, where they exist at all, are thin and only lightly calcified, since a rigid skeleton offers little advantage in an environment where the surrounding water pressure is, in effect, holding everything together far more consistently than bone ever could. Its skin appears delicate, almost fragile, its internal organs visible faintly through translucent tissue that would offer no protection whatsoever against a predator or a rough surface nearer the light-filled world above, but which serves it perfectly well here, in water so calm, so stable, so free from the turbulence and physical hazard that shape life in shallower, more chaotic environments. Even the way this fish moves reflects its surroundings. There is no need for speed here, no predator likely to chase it across open ground, no prey requiring a sudden burst of pursuit. Its motion instead carries a slow, deliberate quality, fins rippling gently rather than driving hard against the water, its whole manner suggesting an existence built entirely around patience rather than urgency, around conservation of whatever limited energy this deep, food-scarce world happens to make available to it. Beyond this basic softness, researchers studying snailfish recovered from extreme depth have discovered something more specific happening at the molecular level within their bodies, a chemical adaptation allowing the proteins that make up their cells to remain properly folded and functional under pressure that would otherwise distort or destroy the delicate structures most proteins depend on to do their work. Nearly every biological process within a living body relies on proteins holding a very particular, very precise shape, folding into structures specific enough that even a small distortion can prevent them from functioning correctly at all. Under the crushing pressure found at these depths, ordinary proteins, the kind found in creatures living nearer the surface, would be forced into incorrect shapes, essentially breaking the molecular machinery every cell depends on to survive. Snailfish living in the trench have developed proteins containing a particular compound that helps counteract this pressure, stabilizing their molecular structure in a way that allows normal biological function to continue even at depths exceeding 8,000 meters. This same compound appears, in smaller concentrations, throughout the tissue of many creatures living at more moderate depths, but its concentration increases considerably the deeper a species has adapted to live, almost as though evolution itself has been quietly dialing up the same basic solution across generation after generation, calibrating each population more and more precisely to whatever particular pressure defines its own preferred stretch of the ocean's vertical range. Researchers studying this pattern across many different depths and many different species have found what amounts to a consistent relationship, deeper dwelling creatures consistently carrying higher concentrations of this stabilizing compound, as though the ocean itself had written a kind of formula into the chemistry of everything living within it, more depth requiring more of this particular molecular protection, layer after layer, all the way down to the floor of the deepest trench on the planet. There appears to be, in fact, a rough theoretical limit to how much of this compound a body could reasonably accumulate before the solution itself begins to interfere with ordinary biological function, and researchers studying this pattern have noted that the deepest depth at which fish have ever been recorded seems to sit close to where that theoretical limit would predict. This detail hints at something quietly remarkable. Life pushing outward against the very edge of what its own chemistry can support, extending as far into the depths as the fundamental rules of protein stability will allow, and then, perhaps, No further, the amphipods and simpler organisms taking over from there in the deepest handful of kilometers beyond even this fish's own considerable reach. The snailfish is not alone down here. Sharing this floor, moving across the same fine sediment, are creatures belonging to an entirely different branch of the animal kingdom, small, shrimp-like crustaceans called amphipods, gathering sometimes in considerable numbers around whatever source of food happens to have settled onto the seafloor nearby. These amphipods represent some of the most successful and most numerous creatures living at these extreme depths. Their small, segmented bodies well suited to scavenging whatever organic material manages to drift down from the productive waters far above. Unlike the fish sharing this environment, amphipods possess a hardened exoskeleton, a structure that might seem, at first consideration, poorly suited to the crushing conditions found this deep. Yet their shells have their own remarkable chemistry. Some hadal amphipods accumulate unusually high concentrations of aluminum within their exoskeletons, apparently drawn from the surrounding sediment, and researchers believe this unusual mineral chemistry may help their shells remain stable under the extreme conditions of the trench. It is another example of how life here has solved problems in ways that would seem almost impossible from the surface. This detail matters because it reveals something worth sitting with a while. The fact that survival at these depths involves not simply withstanding pressure in some general sense, but solving a whole series of interconnected chemical and physical problems, each one specific to the particular biology of whatever creature happens to be attempting the solution. The snailfish solved its own version of this problem through molecular stabilization within its proteins. The amphipod solved a related but distinct problem through the chemistry of its own shell, incorporating metal drawn directly from the sediment surrounding it into a structure that would otherwise dissolve under conditions this extreme. Neither solution resembles the other very closely, and yet both arrived, across their own separate evolutionary histories, at methods allowing their particular kind of body to continue functioning in a place that would destroy almost anything built without such specific, hard-won adaptation. Some amphipod species gather in numbers substantial enough to be caught when researchers lower specially designed traps down through the water column in swarms numbering in the hundreds, drawn from a considerable distance by even a small piece of bait, their bodies packed together so densely around a fresh source of food that the trap itself sometimes struggles to hold them all. This gathering behavior suggests something significant about the scarcity governing life at this depth, food arriving so rarely and in such limited quantity that any fresh source triggers an intense, competitive rush from every creature within sensing range, an entire community converging within hours on whatever chemical trail happens to lead them toward a meal. Picture, for a moment, not the trench itself, but the sheer scale of time required to produce adaptations this precise, this specific, this thoroughly calibrated to one particular, narrow set of conditions. Evolution does not design a creature deliberately for extreme depth the way an engineer might design a vessel intended for the same purpose. It works instead through the patient accumulation of small, incremental changes across countless generations, each generation slightly better suited to its particular environment than the one before it. The process repeating itself across a span of time considerably longer than most surface-dwelling species have needed to reach their own current form. Snailfish and amphipods living at extreme depth did not descend suddenly into the trench at some point in the past and immediately develop the adaptations necessary to survive there. Their ancestors most likely occupied somewhat shallower water first, gradually extending their range downward across many generations, each incremental increase in depth requiring its own small, corresponding adjustment in body chemistry and structure, the whole process unfolding slowly enough that no single generation would have experienced anything resembling a sudden, dramatic transformation. This is the same basic pattern followed in other stories on this channel. Mountains rising by fractions of a millimeter each year, rivers carving their channels grain by grain across millions of years, forests shaping the evolution of isolated populations divided by nothing more dramatic than the width of a single waterway. Here, in the trench, that same patient logic applies to something considerably more extreme, life itself gradually extending its reach into a place that seems, from any surface perspective, thoroughly hostile to existence of any kind. Genetic studies comparing trench-dwelling snailfish to their shallower relatives elsewhere in the Pacific have found evidence supporting exactly this kind of gradual descent, the deepest populations sharing a more recent common ancestor with certain moderately deep species than with anything living near the surface, suggesting a slow, stepwise colonization of increasing depth rather than any single, dramatic leap from shallow water directly into the crushing dark of the trench floor. Each generation, in this sense, inherited a body only slightly better adapted than its parents had been, a slow relay of adjustment passed downward through time and depth simultaneously, until eventually, after a period stretching across millions of years, descendants of fish once living in comparatively ordinary, moderate water found themselves capable of surviving in conditions their distant ancestors could never have tolerated at all. Beyond fish and crustaceans, the trench floor supports other forms of life too, though many of these remain considerably less studied and less understood than the creatures already described. Single-celled organisms exist here in genuinely enormous numbers, invisible to the naked eye but present throughout the sediment covering this deep floor, some of them deriving energy not from any form of light, since none reaches this depth, but from chemical processes occurring within the sediment itself, breaking down minerals and compounds buried within the mud in ways that release small amounts of usable energy, an entirely different foundation for life than anything operating in the sunlit water so many kilometers above. This chemical basis for life, sometimes called chemosynthesis, represents a considerably different strategy from the photosynthesis powering nearly everything living in the ocean's upper layers, where photosynthesis depends entirely on sunlight, converting that light directly into usable chemical energy. Chemosynthesis instead draws its energy from reactions occurring between certain chemical compounds entirely independent of any light source at all. Organisms capable of this process exist throughout the deep ocean, but they find particularly favorable conditions in certain stretches of the trench floor, where geological activity related to the same subduction process explored earlier occasionally releases specific minerals and compounds into the surrounding sediment and water, providing exactly the kind of chemical foundation these organisms depend on to survive. Larger creatures, in turn, sometimes depend indirectly on this chemical foundation, either by consuming the microorganisms directly or by consuming other, slightly larger creatures that themselves feed on this same deep chemical basis of life. An entire food web, in other words, can exist down here almost entirely disconnected from the sun, built instead on a foundation of chemistry rather than light. A genuinely different kind of ecosystem operating according to entirely different fundamental rules than anything found nearer the surface, and yet no less real, no less functional, no less capable of sustaining generation after generation, of living creatures across a span of time reaching back millions of years. Researchers exploring this chemical basis of life in the trench have noted its significance extends well beyond simple curiosity about deep-sea biology. Life dependent on chemistry rather than sunlight offers a useful model for thinking about how life might exist elsewhere entirely, on moons and planets far beyond this one, where sunlight either never reaches at all or arrives too faintly to support anything resembling ordinary photosynthesis. Certain icy moons orbiting the outer planets of this solar system are thought to hold liquid oceans hidden beneath their frozen surfaces, and the possibility that life might exist within them, sustained by chemistry rather than light in a manner similar to what happens here on the trench floor, has made this particular corner of Earth's own ocean a genuine point of reference for scientists considering where else across the wider universe life might quietly be waiting to be found. The marine snow followed earlier in tonight's journey, falling continuously from the productive waters far above, provides another significant source of energy for life at this depth, arriving here after a journey that may have taken weeks to complete, settling finally onto the trench floor where it becomes food for whatever creature happens to encounter it first. Amphipods gather in particular abundance wherever a larger piece of organic material happens to land, sometimes drawn in from a considerable distance by chemical signals dispersing slowly through the surrounding water, arriving in numbers substantial enough to strip a modest piece of material down to nothing within a matter of hours, an efficient, patient scavenging system that ensures almost nothing arriving on this floor goes to waste for very long. This connection between the surface and the trench floor deserves particular attention, because it reveals something important about how thoroughly interconnected this entire vertical column of ocean actually remains, despite the dramatic differences separating one zone from the next. The plankton drifting through sunlit water so many kilometers above eventually contributes, through its own death and decay, to the food available on the trench floor far below. Life at the very bottom of the ocean depends, in this indirect but genuine sense, on the same sunlight powering everything living near the surface, connected across an enormous vertical distance by nothing more than the slow, patient, continuous fall of organic material sinking gradually downward through every zone followed across tonight's entire journey. There is a particular quality to this connection worth sitting with quietly for a moment. A single flake of marine snow, having originated as some small fragment of plankton near the sunlit surface, might complete its long, slow fall through the twilight zone, through the absolute darkness of the midnight zone, arriving finally on the trench floor to feed a creature that will never once, across the whole of its own existence, encounter sunlight directly in any form. And yet that creature's survival depends entirely on light it will never see, gathered by organisms living in a world it will never visit, carried downward across a distance greater than the height of the tallest mountain on the planet's surface, arriving here, finally, as nourishment for a life built entirely around the absence of everything that made its own existence possible in the first place. There is something worth considering carefully in all of this, something that reframes what it actually means for a place to be hostile to life. From any perspective shaped by the bright, warm, oxygen-rich conditions found near the surface, the trench floor would appear to represent something close to the absolute limit of where life could possibly exist at all. Crushing pressure, permanent darkness, near freezing temperature, an environment seemingly designed to prevent survival rather than support it. And yet life exists here anyway, not merely surviving in some marginal, barely functional way, but genuinely thriving, adapted so precisely to these particular conditions that the very features making this place seem hostile from a surface perspective have become, for the creatures living here, simply the ordinary, unremarkable backdrop of everyday existence. The snailfish gliding across this floor experiences no particular hardship in doing so. This is, for it, home exactly as familiar and exactly as comfortable in its own particular way as any sunlit reef feels to the fish living there instead. This reframing matters beyond simply the trench itself. It suggests something broader about the nature of life generally, its remarkable capacity to adapt itself, given sufficient time, to conditions that would seem, from any other vantage point, entirely impossible to survive. Wherever a source of energy exists, however faint, however strange, however far removed from anything resembling the conditions life first emerged within, something, eventually, given enough patient generations, tends to find a way to make use of it. Beneath the creatures moving across this floor, beneath the snailfish and the amphipods and the countless microscopic organisms drawing their energy from mineral chemistry rather than light, lies the floor itself. And it deserves its own attention now, because the ground at the bottom of the deepest trench on the planet is not what most people imagine when picturing an ocean floor. There is no bare, exposed rock here, no dramatic canyon wall descending directly into open water. Instead, the trench floor is covered in a thick, fine layer of sediment, soft enough that a footstep, were such a thing possible at this depth, would sink several centimeters before finding anything resembling solid resistance beneath it. This sediment has been accumulating here for an extraordinarily long stretch of time, built up gradually from exactly the kind of marine snow followed throughout tonight's journey. The slow, continuous fall of organic material and fine mineral particles settling onto this floor grain by grain, year after year, century after century, across a length of time reaching back millions of years. This accumulation happens with a particular slowness, even by the patient standards this entire documentary has followed across so many previous evenings together. In many parts of the deep ocean, sediment builds at a rate of only a few centimeters every 1,000 years, meaning the layers covering the trench floor right now, however unremarkable they might appear to an untrained eye, represent an almost incomprehensibly long record of everything that has settled onto this exact spot since long before anything resembling human civilization began. Within this sediment, preserved in a kind of natural archive few other places on the planet can match, lies evidence of climate patterns, ocean chemistry, and biological activity stretching back across an enormous span of geological time. Because conditions on the trench floor remain so remarkably stable, undisturbed by the storms and currents that regularly churn and mix sediment in shallower water, layers here tend to remain largely intact, settling one atop another in an order that roughly corresponds to the passage of time itself, each layer holding within it a faint chemical and physical record of the particular conditions present in the ocean above when that layer originally formed. Researchers who have managed to extract sediment cores from trench environments describe them almost the way a geologist might describe a core drilled from ancient rock, a physical record extending backward through time, each centimetre of depth corresponding to a certain span of years, decades, or even centuries, depending on the particular rate of accumulation at that specific location. Within these cores, traces of ancient volcanic ash mark specific eruptions that occurred somewhere on the surrounding seafloor or nearby islands. Subtle shifts in chemical composition reveal changes in ocean temperature and circulation reaching back across hundreds of thousands of years. Even the shells of microscopic organisms preserved within the sediment after their own deaths carry within their own chemistry a faint record of the particular conditions present in the water above at the moment they were alive. Even fragments of plastic, arriving here only within the last century, have been found preserved within sediment cores taken from the trench floor. An unsettling but genuinely revealing detail about just how thoroughly connected this deepest, most remote stretch of the planet remains to activity happening on the surface world so many kilometers above. Whatever settles onto the surface of the wider ocean, however far from this exact point, eventually has some chance, given enough time, of completing the same long, slow fall followed by the marine snow throughout tonight's journey, arriving finally on this ancient floor to become part of the same patient, layered record accumulating here since long before anyone existed to produce anything resembling plastic at all. The sediment itself is not entirely undisturbed, however, despite the stability characterizing so much of this environment. The same tectonic forces responsible for carving the trench in the first place continue to shape its floor even now. Occasional seismic activity related to the ongoing subduction process, sometimes triggering small landslides along the trench's steep walls, sending fresh material tumbling down toward the floor below and disturbing whatever layers happened to have settled there previously. These events happen infrequently by any surface standard, perhaps only once every several decades or centuries at any particular stretch of the trench. But across the vast span of geological time this entire story has been following, they represent a meaningful, recurring feature of how this floor continues to change and rearrange itself, even in a place otherwise defined by such profound and lasting stillness. Certain stretches of the trench floor also bear evidence of a process called serpentinization, a chemical reaction occurring when seawater interacts with particular kinds of rock exposed along portions of the seafloor, producing distinctive mineral formations and sometimes releasing small amounts of hydrogen and methane into the surrounding water and sediment. This process connects, in its own way, to the chemosynthetic organisms described a little earlier, providing exactly the kind of chemical foundation certain microorganisms depend on to sustain themselves without any need for sunlight at all. Scientists studying these formations have found them scattered at various points along the trench's length, each one representing a small, localized pocket where the deep chemistry of the Earth itself, rather than anything falling from the productive waters above, provides the foundation for whatever life happens to gather there. Our own drop of water, having settled now onto this ancient, patient floor, rests among sediment that has been accumulating here since long before it began its own particular journey, through every zone followed across this entire evening. It has arrived at a place holding within its layered ground a record considerably longer and considerably more detailed than almost anywhere else on the surface of this planet. A quiet archive built one falling grain at a time, undisturbed by storm or season, protected by depth and pressure and darkness from almost everything that regularly reshapes the more familiar, more visible landscapes closer to the world we know. It rests here now, alongside the snailfish moving slowly across the mud nearby, alongside the amphipods gathering wherever a fresh piece of marine snow happens to land, alongside the microscopic organisms drawing their own quiet sustenance from chemistry rather than light, part of a floor that holds within its fine, undisturbed sediment nearly every layer of history this ocean has ever produced, settled here in a stillness and darkness that few places on this entire planet could ever hope to match. Even now, with submersibles capable of reaching the trench floor and returning safely, with satellites mapping nearly every visible surface feature of this planet from orbit, the Mariana Trench remains one of the least explored places on the surface of the Earth, and understanding why requires looking closely at just how many separate, difficult problems stand between anyone on the surface and a genuine, thorough survey of what actually exists down here. The pressure alone accounts for much of this difficulty, though it's worth being specific about exactly what that pressure requires of anything built to withstand it. At the depth of the Challenger Deep, every square inch of a vessel's surface bears a weight equivalent to several tons pressing inward from every direction at once. Ordinary engineering, the kind that serves perfectly well for submarines operating at more moderate depths, becomes entirely inadequate here. A hull capable of surviving this pressure must be built from materials and shaped into forms specifically designed to distribute that crushing force evenly across the entire structure, since even a small flaw, a microscopic crack, or an imperfect weld could become the single point of failure that allows the surrounding pressure to breach the vessel entirely. Engineers designing vessels for this purpose often turn to a sphere as the basic shape for any pressurized chamber intended to carry passengers, since a sphere distributes external pressure more evenly across its surface than almost any other geometric form, avoiding the kind of stress concentration that flatter or more angular shapes would experience under conditions this extreme. Even the thickness of the metal or specialized composite material forming this sphere must be calculated with extraordinary precision, thick enough to withstand the crushing weight of the water column above, yet not so thick that the entire vessel becomes too heavy to manage safely, its buoyancy carefully balanced against every additional gram of material required for the sphere's own protection. This engineering challenge alone explains much of why so few vessels have ever been built capable of reaching this particular depth. Each one requires years of careful design, testing, and refinement, often drawing on entirely new materials and construction techniques developed specifically for this single purpose, since almost nothing built for any other application transfers directly to conditions this extreme. The spherical pressure chambers used to carry human passengers to these depths represent one of the most demanding engineering challenges in the entire field of ocean exploration. Every component tested repeatedly under simulated pressure before ever being trusted to carry a human being safely down through 11 kilometers of increasingly hostile water. Beyond the vessel itself, every other piece of equipment intended to function at this depth faces its own version of the same fundamental problem. Cameras, lights, sensors, robotic arms, all of it must be housed within its own pressure-resistant casing, adding weight and complexity to every single component involved in any expedition attempting to properly document what exists on the trench floor. A single camera housing failure at this depth doesn't simply damage the equipment. It typically destroys it entirely, the surrounding pressure collapsing whatever gap or weakness allowed water to begin entering the sealed compartment, often within a fraction of a second once that first breach occurs. Even something as seemingly ordinary as the mechanical arms sometimes used to collect sediment or biological samples from the trench floor requires specialized design, hydraulic systems adjusted specifically to function correctly under pressure that would immobilize or destroy an ordinary mechanism almost instantly. Every joint, every seal, every moving part must be reconsidered from the ground up, tested repeatedly at simulated depth before ever being trusted with an actual descent into the trench itself, since a single mechanical failure at this depth cannot simply be repaired on site the way a malfunction might be addressed on a surface vessel. Whatever fails at the bottom of the Challenger Deep remains failed until the entire vessel completes its long, careful return to the surface. Communication presents its own considerable obstacle, one easy to overlook until you actually consider what it would take to send a message or receive one across 11 kilometers of water this dense and this deep. Radio waves, the method used for nearly all wireless communication on the surface world, travel poorly through water, losing their strength rapidly within even a short distance of the surface. This means any vessel operating at extreme depth cannot simply radio back to the surface the way a ship or aircraft might communicate with a distant base. Instead, expeditions reaching these depths typically rely on acoustic signals, sound waves traveling through the water itself, carrying information back to the surface at a pace considerably slower than any radio transmission, and requiring considerable technical sophistication to encode and decode reliably across such an enormous distance. Even with modern technology, this acoustic communication remains limited in what it can reliably transmit, sufficient for basic status updates and simple commands, but far from capable of streaming the kind of continuous, high-resolution video that might otherwise allow researchers on the surface to observe everything happening on the trench floor in real time. For crewed missions, this communication limitation carries an additional weight worth sitting with for a moment. The two men aboard the Trieste during that first historic descent in 1960 spent their entire journey down and their entire journey back up, largely isolated from the surface world above them. Their connection to everything and everyone they knew reduced to occasional, limited acoustic signals passing slowly through miles of dark, cold water. Even now, decades later, anyone traveling to these depths accepts a similar isolation, however brief, cut off from easy communication with the surface world in a way almost no other form of exploration on this planet requires. Sound itself, traveling through water this deep, behaves in ways that add further complication to this already difficult task. Temperature and pressure both affect the speed at which sound travels, and across the vast vertical distance separating the trench floor from any listening vessel waiting at the surface. These variations can bend and distort a signal considerably, requiring careful calibration and correction before any message can be properly understood. Engineers working on this particular problem have spent decades refining the techniques used to send and interpret these signals, gradually improving the reliability of communication across a distance that, for most of human history, would have seemed entirely impossible to bridge at all. Beyond the challenges of pressure and communication, simple scale presents its own formidable obstacle to thorough exploration. The trench itself stretches across more than 2,500 kilometers, an area far too vast for any single expedition, however well equipped, to survey in anything resembling completeness. Even focusing exclusively on the very deepest point, the Challenger Deep alone covers an area considerably larger than many people imagine when picturing a single, narrow slot in the seafloor, meaning that even repeated visits to this specific location have only managed to observe a small fraction of its total extent. Consider, too, the simple cost and logistical difficulty involved in mounting any expedition capable of reaching these depths at all. Each descent requires months of preparation, careful maintenance, and testing of extraordinarily specialized equipment, a support vessel capable of safely deploying and recovering whatever submersible is being used, and a team of highly trained specialists overseeing every stage of the process. This isn't the kind of exploration that can happen casually or repeatedly the way researchers might survey a coral reef in shallower, more accessible water. Every single descent to the trench floor represents a significant undertaking, planned meticulously across a considerable stretch of time, executed with extreme caution and limited by simple practical necessity to a relatively small number of attempts across the many decades since exploration of this depth first became possible at all. Weather and sea conditions at the surface add their own layer of unpredictability to this already demanding process. Deploying and recovering a submersible capable of reaching such extreme depth requires calm water and favorable conditions, and any expedition planning a descent must remain prepared to delay, sometimes for days at a stretch, waiting for the surface above the trench to settle into conditions safe enough for the delicate process of lowering and later retrieving such a valuable, carefully engineered vessel. Given these considerable obstacles, much of the ongoing effort to understand this trench more thoroughly has shifted toward robotic exploration rather than crewed missions. Unmanned vehicles capable of reaching these depths without the additional complexity and risk involved in keeping human passengers alive and safe throughout the journey. These remotely operated vehicles, controlled from the surface through the same kind of acoustic communication described earlier, or in some cases operating with a degree of pre-programmed autonomy, have allowed researchers to survey considerably more of the trench than crewed expeditions alone could ever hope to manage. Equipped with cameras, sensors, and sometimes small collection devices capable of gathering sediment or biological samples, these robotic explorers have gradually built up a more detailed picture of trench conditions across multiple locations. Though even this expanded effort has only managed to survey a relatively small fraction of the trench's total area. Picture one of these robotic vehicles descending slowly through the same zones followed throughout tonight's entire journey, its own lights cutting through darkness that has never once been illuminated by anything resembling natural light, its sensors recording temperature and pressure and chemical composition continuously as it travels, its cameras capturing whatever creatures happen to drift into view during its slow, careful descent. Unlike a crewed vessel, this robotic explorer carries no urgency to return quickly to the surface, no human passengers whose safety must remain the primary consideration throughout the mission. It can remain at depth for extended periods, patiently recording whatever the trench floor happens to reveal, sending its findings back to researchers waiting on the surface through the same slow, careful acoustic signals that have carried information up from these depths since exploration first began. Some of these vehicles operate tethered to their support ship by a long cable, allowing near-continuous communication and real-time control, though at the cost of limiting how far the vehicle can range from the point directly above it. Others, designed to operate independently for extended stretches, follow pre-programmed routes across the trench floor, gathering data and imagery that only becomes fully accessible once the vehicle has completed its mission and returned to the surface for retrieval. Each approach carries its own particular trade-off between control and range, between immediacy and endurance, researchers choosing whichever method best suits the particular question a given expedition hopes to answer. Even with these robotic tools, significant portions of the trench remain essentially unmapped in any detailed sense. Their particular sediment composition, their specific biological communities, their precise geological features still largely unknown to anyone studying them from the surface world above. This isn't a failure of effort or ambition. It reflects, instead, the genuine and persistent difficulty of studying an environment this extreme, this remote, this fundamentally resistant to the kind of casual, repeated observation that has allowed researchers to build detailed pictures of nearly every other major ecosystem on the planet's surface. There is a particular kind of humility worth sitting with in this ongoing incompleteness, similar in some ways to the acknowledgement of unexplored territory explored in an earlier story on this channel, when we followed a river through some of the most remote and least documented stretches of forest anywhere on the African continent. Here, in the trench, that same humility applies with even greater force. We know, with reasonable confidence, the exact depth of the Challenger Deep, measured repeatedly across multiple expeditions using increasingly precise instruments. We know a reasonable amount about the particular adaptations allowing certain creatures to survive here. And yet, for all of this accumulated knowledge, entire stretches of the trench's total length remain essentially unvisited, holding within them whatever particular creatures, whatever particular geological features, whatever particular chemical processes happen to define that specific, unexplored section, waiting quietly for whatever future expedition might eventually manage to reach them. Picture, for a moment, what it might mean for this incompleteness to persist, perhaps for generations still to come. Unlike the surface world, where satellite imagery has made it possible to observe nearly every visible feature of the planet within a matter of years, the ocean floor, and this trench most particularly, resists this kind of comprehensive, rapid survey. Water itself blocks most forms of remote sensing that work so effectively across dry land, meaning any thorough understanding of what exists down here requires physical presence, whether human or robotic, traveling slowly and carefully through the same extreme conditions described throughout this entire evening. This slow pace of discovery carries its own particular quality, worth considering alongside everything else explored tonight. In a world that so often feels thoroughly mapped, thoroughly understood, thoroughly reduced to information instantly available at a glance, this trench continues to hold genuine mystery, Not the manufactured mystery of something deliberately hidden, but the honest, patient mystery of something simply too remote, too extreme, too difficult to reach for anyone to have properly finished exploring it yet. There is something quietly restful in this thought if you allow yourself to sit with it a while. Not everything has been seen. Not everything has been mapped and catalogued and reduced to a simple, complete record. Somewhere beneath the ocean's surface, in the deepest trench on the entire planet, genuine unknowns still wait, patient and undisturbed, exactly as they have waited for millions of years already. Now, having spent this entire evening descending gradually through every zone this trench contains, from the bright, restless surface down through fading twilight and absolute darkness, through the deep mechanics of subduction, through the deepest point on the planet's entire surface, through the strange and remarkable life adapted to survive there, and through the persistent, honest mystery still. Surrounding so much of what remains unexplored, it's time to begin our journey back upward, retracing, in reverse, the long path our single drop of water has followed across this entire story. Picture beginning this ascent slowly, leaving behind the ancient, patient sediment of the trench floor, rising gradually back through the same darkness we descended through so many hours ago, the crushing pressure easing by degrees with every metre gained, the absolute cold beginning its own slow retreat as warmer water, however faintly warmer, begins to make its presence known once again. The journey upward passes first back through the midnight zone, that vast stretch of permanent darkness we explored earlier, its profound stillness and unbroken cold gradually giving way, as the ascent continues, to something subtly different, a faint suggestion, at first almost imperceptible, that somewhere far above, light still exists in this ocean, waiting to be rediscovered after this long, patient absence. Rising further, the twilight zone reappears, its faint, blue-grey illumination returning gradually, the same bioluminescent creatures we encountered during our descent visible once again, their small, scattered points of light drifting through water that has begun, ever so slightly, to hold its own trace of genuine, if still very faint, natural illumination from the sun far above. The deep scattering layer, that dense concentration of small fish and crustaceans gathering at this particular depth, moves around the ascending water in its own slow, patient rhythm, some of its members beginning their own nightly journey upward towards slightly shallower water, following the same ancient migration pattern described earlier in this story. Continuing upward, past the boundary where the twilight zone finally gives way to genuine, unmistakable sunlight, the water begins to warm noticeably now. The deep cold of the trench's lower reaches replaced gradually by something closer to the gentle, comfortable temperature familiar from the surface world above. Colour begins returning too. The deep, singular blue that dominated so much of the descent giving way gradually to a fuller spectrum, yellows and greens becoming visible again as the water grows shallower, until finally, breaking through the last remaining metres of the sunlit zone, full, warm, golden daylight surrounds everything once more. Picture emerging, finally, at the surface itself, the same restless, wind-touched water we began this entire journey within so many hours ago. Small waves rising and falling under whatever breeze happens to be crossing this particular stretch of the Pacific tonight. Sunlight, or in this case perhaps the softer light of evening, scattering across the surface in countless small, shifting reflections. Nothing about this surface view offers any hint of what lies so far beneath it. The same invisible quality noted at the very beginning of tonight's journey. An entire trench, an entire hidden world of pressure and darkness, and remarkable, patient life, existing just beneath this calm, ordinary-looking water, entirely unseen by anyone simply gazing out across the horizon from a boat or from a distant shore. There is something worth considering carefully in this final view from the surface, looking back, in a sense, at everything we've just descended through and returned from across this entire evening together. The ocean, taken as a whole, represents one continuous system, connected from its brightest, most familiar surface water all the way down to its deepest, most extreme trench floor, each zone distinct in its own particular character, and yet none of them entirely separate from the others, joined by the same falling marine snow, the same slow currents, the same fundamental laws of pressure and chemistry, and biology that govern every stretch of water between the surface and the seafloor. Picture this entire vertical column of ocean as something closer to a single, enormous, continuous being rather than a series of separate, disconnected layers, its uppermost reaches catching sunlight and supporting the drifting plankton that begins nearly every food chain within it, its middle reaches holding the strange, glowing creatures adapted to fading light and building pressure, its deepest reaches holding life adapted so precisely to crushing darkness that survival there depends on chemistry operating at a molecular level few people ever pause to consider. All of it connected, all of it part of the same single ocean, stretching from bright surface to permanent darkness, from familiar warmth to crushing, near freezing cold, from the gentle rocking of surface waves to the profound, unbroken stillness resting at the very bottom of the deepest trench this planet has ever produced. This connection extends further still, beyond simply the ocean itself, reaching outward into the wider systems governing this entire planet's climate, its chemistry, its long, patient geological history. The trench we've explored tonight exists because of the same tectonic forces shaping mountain ranges and volcanic islands elsewhere on the surface world, the same slow, patient movement of rock that has been reshaping this planet's surface for billions of years, building upward in some places, carving downward in others, according to the same fundamental principles governing everything we've followed. Across this entire evening, the water filling this trench, and every other ocean and sea on the planet's surface traces its own origin back to the same deep history explored in an earlier journey on this channel. Water rising from within the Earth through ancient volcanic activity, water arriving from the cold, distant edges of the solar system carried by comets and asteroids across an almost unimaginable span of early time, gradually accumulating into the vast, connected ocean that now covers most of this planet's surface, reaching, in its deepest point, nearly 11 kilometers below the waves, holding within its lowest, darkest reaches life adapted to conditions that would have seemed, to that same water in its earliest form, entirely impossible to imagine. Even the carbon cycling slowly through this ocean, drawn down from the atmosphere near the surface, and eventually settling, in some small fraction, onto the trench floor far below, connects this deepest, most remote environment to the same wider planetary systems governing climate and weather across the entire surface world. Nothing here exists in true isolation, however far removed it might feel from anything familiar. Every zone we've descended through tonight remains woven into the same larger fabric of processes that has been operating across this planet for longer than any single feature within it, mountain or ocean or trench, has existed in its current particular form. Floating here now, at the surface, after completing this long, patient descent and ascent through every layer of the Mariana Trench, it is worth pausing simply to notice how little the surface has changed. The water moves gently beneath the evening sky, while far below, nearly 11 kilometers beneath the waves, the trench continues its quiet existence. Somewhere in that darkness, a snailfish moves slowly across ancient sediment. Tiny organisms continue their unseen work. Marine snow continues its patient descent. And deep beneath everything, the tectonic plates continue their almost imperceptible movement, shaping the seafloor one tiny motion at a time. Nothing above announces any of this. From the surface, the ocean appears almost ordinary. But beneath that calm surface lies an entire world of darkness, pressure, geology, and life. A world that has been changing slowly for millions of years and will continue changing long after tonight's journey has ended. And perhaps that is the most peaceful thing about the deepest place on Earth. It does not need to be visited to continue existing. It does not need to be understood completely. It simply remains there, far below the waves, moving through its own ancient rhythms while the ocean surface rises and falls gently above it. And now, as our journey comes to an end, we can leave that hidden world where we found it, resting quietly beneath the Pacific in darkness and silence, waiting for another night, another journey, and perhaps another drop of water to begin the descent once again. The single drop of water we followed tonight has completed a journey most people will never fully picture, from the bright, warm surface where sunlight still reached it, down through fading blue twilight, into absolute and permanent darkness, resting finally on a floor buried beneath nearly 11 kilometers of ocean, before rising again, slowly, back toward the same restless surface where this whole story began. Let the whole shape of that journey settle now, the way a current settles once it reaches open, level water. Picture, once more, the surface itself, that first bright layer where plankton drifted in golden shafts of light, where fish moved through water, lit brightly enough to cast visible shadows on whatever seafloor happened to lie beneath it, where small waves rose and fell under an ordinary afternoon sky, giving no hint of anything extraordinary lying far below. From there, the light began its long, gradual fade, red disappearing first, then orange, then yellow, then green, until only blue remained, deepening slowly into something darker, something quieter, as the sunlit zone gave way to twilight. Bioluminescent creatures appeared in that fading blue, small points of light scattered through the water like a private constellation belonging entirely to the deep, flashing in patterns meant for eyes other than our own. Marine snow drifted downward through all of it, a slow, continuous, patient fall of pale, organic material, carrying energy from the bright world above down into depths that sunlight itself could never reach. Then came the absolute dark of the midnight zone, a darkness without variation, without day or night, without season, holding within it a stillness unlike anything found closer to the surface, cold and stable and unbroken across a span of time longer than most surface features on this planet have existed in their current form. Beneath even that profound stillness, we found the true origin of this entire trench, not in anything the water itself had done, but in the slow, patient bending of rock, one plate sliding beneath another across millions of years, curving downward into the mantle, carving this long, deep scar into the ocean floor through a process that continues today with exactly the same imperceptible slowness it has always carried. We pictured the old, dense crust of the Pacific Plate, formed at some distant ridge and drifted for millions of years across an entire ocean basin before finally arriving at this one boundary, ready to begin its long descent back into the depths it originally rose from. That descent brought us, eventually, to the Challenger Deep itself, the single lowest point on the surface of this entire planet, deeper than any mountain is tall, a place visited by only a small handful of human beings across the whole of recorded history, reached first by 2 men inside a steel sphere in 1960, and by only a few others since, each descent requiring years of careful engineering, each vessel built specifically to withstand a pressure that would crush almost anything else built by human hands. And there, on that ancient floor, we found life. Not merely surviving, but genuinely at home. A snailfish gliding slowly across fine sediment, its body soft and pale, its proteins stabilized by chemistry evolved specifically to withstand pressure that would destroy ordinary biological structure. Amphipods gathering in the dark, their shells reinforced with aluminum drawn directly from the surrounding mud. Microscopic organisms drawing their own quiet energy, not from sunlight, which never reaches this depth, but from chemistry itself, breaking down minerals in the sediment in a process entirely independent of anything happening in the bright world so many kilometers above. Beneath all of this, the trench floor itself held its own kind of record, layer upon layer of fine sediment accumulated across millions of years. Each layer a faint, patient trace of whatever conditions existed in the ocean above at the moment it settled into place, undisturbed by storm or season, protected by depth and darkness from almost everything that regularly reshapes the more visible landscapes, closer to the world we know. And even now, after generations of careful study, after crude descents and robotic expeditions and decades of steadily improving technology, so much of this trench remains unvisited, unmapped, unknown, not from any lack of effort, but simply because depth and pressure and darkness make this one of the most difficult places on the entire planet to properly explore. Our own drop of water has completed this entire circuit now, descending through every zone, resting briefly on that ancient floor and rising again, slowly, back toward the surface it left behind so many hours ago. Picture it here now, close to that same bright, restless water where this whole journey began, warmed again by whatever sun happens to be reaching this stretch of ocean, carried gently by the same currents that carried it away in the first place. It carries nothing with it that could be called memory. It holds no trace, in any way that could be measured, of the darkness it passed through, or the pressure it briefly endured, or the strange, glowing creatures it drifted alongside somewhere in the deepening blue of the twilight zone. And yet, in some looser sense, worth sitting with for a moment before we let it go entirely, it carries all of it anyway, the way any part of something as vast and connected as this ocean carries, within it, the whole of what that ocean actually is. There is a kind of comfort available in this thought if you let yourself rest inside it a while. The ocean above the trench looks, from any surface vantage point, like nothing more than an ordinary stretch of blue water, indistinguishable from any other patch of open sea. And yet beneath that ordinary surface, an entire hidden world continues its own patient existence, layer after layer of increasingly strange and increasingly extreme conditions, all the way down to a floor deeper than any mountain is tall, where life has found its own quiet way to continue, entirely apart from anything resembling the bright, familiar world most of us think of when we picture the sea. Perhaps there is something in this worth carrying with you now, as your own thoughts begin to settle the way that single drop of water settled, so many kilometers down, onto ground few will ever see directly. Not everything worth knowing announces itself from a distance. Not everything remarkable rises visibly above the surface of ordinary experience. Some of the most extraordinary things on this entire planet exist quietly, patiently, entirely unseen, waiting in the dark for whoever happens to be curious enough and patient enough to make the long, slow journey down to find them. Somewhere right now, in that same trench, a snailfish continues its unhurried movement across ground it has known. In whatever sense a creature like this can be said to know anything for the whole of its own life. Somewhere above it, in the fading blue of the twilight zone, small lights flicker on and off in the dark, a private language passing between creatures that will never once encounter sunlight directly. Somewhere far below all of it, Rock continues its own imperceptible bending, the trench deepening by some fraction too small to measure, exactly as it has done for millions of years, and exactly as it will continue doing long after tonight has passed, long after this particular telling of this particular story has faded from memory the way light itself fades on the way down into deep water. None of it asks anything of you. None of it requires your attention to continue. It simply exists, the way the deepest and oldest things on this planet have always simply existed, patient and complete in themselves, indifferent to whether anyone above happens to be thinking of them at any given moment. And yet, tonight, for a little while, you did think of it. You travelled with a single drop of water from bright surface to permanent dark and back again, resting for a while at the very bottom of the world, in the company of creatures built entirely for stillness and patience, and the slow, careful conservation of whatever little energy manages to reach them. Let your own thoughts rest there now, in that same quiet stillness, while the ocean continues its slow movement above. The surface catches the last traces of evening light. Far below, the twilight fades into darkness, and deeper still, beneath nearly 11 kilometers of water, the Mariana Trench rests quietly beneath the Pacific. Our drop of water has returned to the surface. The journey is over. But far below, the deepest place on Earth continues its ancient rhythm, untouched by the need for anyone to watch. So let the ocean carry the rest of the story for you now. The water rises and falls. The currents move gently through the darkness, and somewhere beneath them, the Mariana Trench rests quietly beneath the night. Just let yourself drift. Good night. Sleep well.